I decided to properly fix up this messy workshop. So, as the very first step, I decided to build a workbench. So I designed it myself, bought the wood, carried it, cut it and sanded it up. Assembled the frame and stretchers, put the top and bottom panels on, and finished it up to complete my very first workbench. This is the record of the past 3 weeks, where I struggled in the unfamiliar world of woodworking. Before doing the design, I searched YouTube for workbench videos. What's funny is that everyone had a workbench just to make another workbench. It was hard to find a video of making a workbench completely from scratch. A Rubo-style workbench with thick solid wood legs and a top looked awesome, but I thought the material costs were too high and it was a bit too much for my personal projects. So I decided to just use standard 2x4s and cheap plywood for the design. I used Autodesk Fusion, which I am familiar with. I thought a size of about 900 by 1200 millimeters would be just right. I saw that having a table saw mounted on one side looked really useful, so I decided to make it this way. Since I wasn't confident in cutting proper joints, I decided to overlap 2 pieces of wood to make a similar structure, after fixing it many times. Finally, I finished the design, and I installed a plugin called Mapboard Pro to make the cut list and bound. Now that I've made the 2D drawings, I think I just need to buy the wood and start the work. 저기요.
방목을 실내에 두면 안 좋다고 하던데 누가?
요즘은 안 그래요.
요즘은 안 그래요?
Eu já cansei de te chamar pra tu sair de casa, mas você continua com essa enrolação. Continua com essa enrolação. Eu já limpei a arrumei aqui, você pediu tudo, você tinha outra coisa. Eu já cansei de te chamar pra tu sair de casa, mas você continua com essa enrolação. Eu já cansei de te chamar pra tu sair de casa. Coisa Lavei e arrumei o que você pediu, enquanto você tinha um bolso para cozinhar. E mesmo assim, depois de tudo, você não saiu. Me pinta que agora vai preparar o jantar. Eu já não sei te chamando, sair de casa. Você continua.
더 있어야 될 것 같은데. 안 들어가.
after 3 weeks of hard work. Phase 1 of my very first workbench is complete. I made it with cheap materials, but it's wide and sturdy enough for my work. However, I'm bummed that the table saw is higher than I planned, but when using a long miter bar like this, I think this might actually be better. I also thought about putting in other tools like a router table instead of the table saw. So I haven't fixed the table saw completely in place yet. I still need to install a front vise here. And I also need to install a tail vise there. I want to add some cabinets at the bottom. I still have a lot of things to do with this workbench. I think this workbench will be under construction for a long time. I lost some weight because of 3 weeks of hard work. Lost in a whole new world. But I loved every moment.